Hi, welcome back to MR Realities. This is a podcast that we do to talk about what's happening with market research and how it's affecting the broader marketing world. We tend to try to talk to experts from all over the world in all sorts of aspects of the business. And my good friend Kevin and I are trying to do this to help educate and just get people up to date with what we think is important that's going on. I'm based in Bangkok, where I do a lot of work around Asia, consulting companies on the way in which people think and feel and how they interact with media and brands. And my good friend Kevin is up there in Tokyo. Kevin.
Hi, yeah, I'm also a private consultant and working globally and trying to make a difference, which is the theme for today's discussion. And we have someone with us who knows how to do that, Kristin Luck, who will be known to most of you, I think, who are listening, at least those who are marketing researchers. Hi, Kristin.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Okay, so again, I'm sure a lot of you're no stranger to most marketing researchers, but could you just give us a 30-second or 1 minute sort of biography on, who you are, what you do, so forth?
Sure, yeah. I mean, my roles changed a little bit in the last couple of years, so I'm going through a little bit of a reinvention myself. I was been pretty much a lifelong researcher, so started out in social science research at university and started working in full service research firms in my mid-20s, and then kind of segued into the tech side of the business and a serial entrepreneur in research technology companies for, over 15 years now. I've been in research around almost 25 years. So, and then when my partners and I sold our firm Decipher at the end of 2014, I just wanted to be just like you and Dave, and so I segued into consulting. As many of us do at this stage of our career. I do growth strategy consulting now, so I work with firms to help them scale and grow their companies, and I'd say probably around 60% of my clients are in the marketing insight space.
Uh-huh. Well, that's interesting. Well, hopefully you don't regret your decision. I don't know. Dave, I think, is a good role model. I'm not so sure if I was or not, but
Dave's
I'm
a
still
great
here
role
after
model.
nearly 11 years, so
Yeah.
surviving.
I mean, it's interesting because I think a lot of folks thought after we sold Decipher that that I was going to go start another company, because that's been kind of my I guess my reputation in the industry has been just as an entrepreneur. But when I really sat and thought about what I enjoyed doing on a day-to-day basis, it wasn't the starting of companies that I loved so much. It was the scaling and all the challenges that come to growing a company. And I thought, gosh, if I could just work with founders all day and help them scale their companies and learn from all my horrible mistakes that I made along the way, gosh, that would just be the most fun that I could have. So I'm really enjoying it.
That's a good place maybe to start, Kristin. So, you've started companies, you've built companies, expanded them, and now you're sort of consulting. And I know you interact with an awful lot of companies, giving them advice and things like that. Put it in that context. What do you think? And I know it's a very general question, but what do you think are the real challenges for somebody who is trying to develop or build a new market research company today in the world? Let's start with some of the general challenges.
Boy, that's a big question.
Yeah, big question. Right.
I mean, honestly, I think one of the biggest challenges that I see for firms, and particularly on the full service side of the business, is really just on how to differentiate yourself. I mean, you kind of got the big players in the full service space, like the GfK and the Ipsos and Nielsen and Kantar, and then you've got a lot of really mid-sized to small boutique full service firms. And I think for many of those players, there's not a whole lot of differentiation, and people haven't spent a whole lot of time thinking about what makes them special and different from their competitive set. And a lot of those firms, they launch with one or two key clients. Usually it's a group of people that have been research analysts or worked in senior executive roles in big full service research firms, and then kind of break out on their own. but without any real key identity or any real plan on how they're going to grow and scale the business. And they might, occasionally run into trouble where they start the business with 1 or 2 clients, and then one client decreases in size, or they lose a client. Now all of a sudden the business is in jeopardy. And so I think the big challenge is, how are you, how thoughtful are you about going into the business, about what makes you special and different? And secondly, how are you going to bring in or attract new clients?
I wonder, as we see lots of people going through that experience that you just mentioned, and I know from my perspective, working across sort of different Asian marketplaces, there's a real emphasis in the world today about go out, do your own thing, and go out and start something new and be entrepreneurial. But then I have this bugbear that people keep on saying, I've been invited to speak at a few different entrepreneurs conferences. And what always amazes me is, well, but aren't you just small business people? I don't understand why you're entrepreneurial. Because you're just investing in doing something that somebody else has sort of done before. So
yeah,
I'm just, and what I find interesting is that people are confusing starting a small business and hoping it will grow versus doing something very different. And they tend to want to say, well, I'm really taking a risk. Well, not really. You're sort of just doing the same small thing.
Right.
But,
right.
What's the I mean, you talked to sort of generally, but what do you see as the magic dust? What's the thing? When you say, you've got to have a point of difference, or you've got to be really different, what do you see as some good examples of companies recently that you've interfaced with that are doing something different and are making a difference?
Yeah, well, I think from my perspective, it's about creating what I would call ownable space. So what is something that you do that is special and different, and that you do in a way that your competitors can't easily claim? And now it doesn't mean they can't claim it. It just means they haven't claimed it, or they can't easily claim it. And that can be really challenging, I think, for a lot of firms to define for themselves. And it can also be really uncomfortable to define. A lot of times to claim that ownable space, it almost is going to feel a little bit like bragging, like you're the best, or you do this the best, or you're the first in a space. And I find that bragging is a pretty uncomfortable business for researchers in general. We're not the most braggy bunch. And so defining what makes you really special and different from anyone else can actually be a pretty uncomfortable activity for a lot of people. I think one of the firms that I've worked with previously that I think has really done a good job of claiming space is a firm called Alter Agents that's based out of Los Angeles. And when I first met them, they were kind of just a small boutique full service research firm, kind of doing qualitative and quantitative research, no real key differentiating factors, and they were really struggling to grow. And we went through this exercise together that was about, hey, what is that ownable space? What's the kind of work that you really enjoy doing and that you're really good at? And that led to them rebranding themselves as strictly a shopper insights firm. And I think that a lot of people shy away from putting a stake in the ground around the types of research that they do or what they specialize in, because they think, oh, well, if I don't do everything, then I'm limiting the amount of business that I can get. But I find it to be quite the opposite, that many times when you do everything, you're trying to be all things to all people, that clients don't know what to call you for. And so defining what you're really good at and the types of research that you specialize in and sort of what your expertise or sweet spot is can be really, really powerful in terms of helping you define the types of work that you do and to help attract clients to you.
Have you found, since you've been in the business, that client expectations have changed markedly? In terms of what they want or what they expect, what they take for granted, what they're looking for in a marketing research supplier, agency, consultant?
I think it depends on the client. I mean, I do definitely see a migration of research insights going more internally at brands, where people are developing their own business intelligence and research teams in-house. And I see more of that, migration than ever before in the industry. That said, I would say that really differs by brand. I mean, I know some really small brands, emerging brands that have business intelligence teams, and that's been a foundational element of their company since day one. And other large brands that continue to outsource 99% of their research to full service. So I think that expectation really varies based on people's comfort level with working with data. And I think as we see a new generation of marketers come into play that are a little more data driven, we're going to see more of that migration to people bringing that business intelligence and analytics function in-house.
Yeah, I noticed there was when I got into the business in the 80s in the U.S., it was much smaller than it is now. And there was a lot more done. We would now use a disparaging term, DIY, but we did a lot of stuff ourselves, and we outsourced what we had to. We had a big competent team. We had former academics, and we basically, apart from me knew what we were doing. And then I guess toward the latter half of the 80s, the consulting firms, at least according to legend and what I heard at the time, what I remember, were saying, well, this is marketing research is not a core function. You can outsource it. You should outsource it. Don't anything that is not a core function, you should outsource. My company was not listening. They were not affected by that. But my sense is that a lot of companies heeded that advice and either began outsourcing in the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of the stuff that they had planned to do in-house, or they just never really developed their internal capacity. Now, after many years, for various reasons, as you point, I've noticed very much the same thing. Some of these functions are being brought back in-house, and I think one can argue that that's the way it should be. If you're an outside a marketing research supplier, consultant, whatever you want to call yourself, that's bad news. But thinking of the industry as a whole, maybe that's better.
Yeah, well, I also think that the data collection component has gotten a lot easier, and so it's easier to bring those activities in-house than it was 20 years ago. You don't have to manage a team of 20 malls to do your mall interviewing or manage a phone room, or you can pretty much do all of that work yourself online. And I think that's only going to get easier as we see more and more of those tasks automated, and also as we get more comfortable working with ancillary data streams, so that we're not just working with primary research data anymore. I think we're going to get to a point where the data collection component is going to go away, maybe not entirely, but significantly as compared to what it is today. And that is going to obviously change the business model and the function of these full service research firms. And you can already see the decline in some of those firms just based on SMR's global market research report. If you look at the GMR, just even from this last year, most of the growth is coming from new methods that are largely automated.
Yeah. I mean, that, and I sense that trend beginning really in the 90s with the globalization of marketing research and other industries where it just was not practical to set up fieldwork companies in like Thailand or Japan or wherever if you've never worked there before. So a lot of this, it was seen as sort of like a cost center. And increasingly that component of the business started being outsourced, I think, in the 90s. And that has increased. And then with the DIY and all the things you can do online, I can't possibly disagree with you. I think it's headed in that direction, definitely. So if you just want to focus on, survey panels and the primary data collection, as you termed it, I think you're going to be in trouble in a bit.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
It's been interesting the last 18 months or so, that I get calls from people I know at big global companies coming back to me and saying, and these are usually companies that have fairly large internal, whatever they describe them as and call them, but large scale market research insights, internal units, departments. But coming back to me and sort of saying, look, we need to do some work we're trying to understand the difference between these 6 markets. And what we'd like to do, Dave, is define a small, very local agency in each marketplace, because we need to find much deeper local interpretation of what we're finding out. So, maybe it's because I get to do with a lot of stuff in Asia, and a lot of mostly big Western companies sort of coming back and sort of saying, look, when I use the big companies, etc., it's great, it's very standardized. When we collect a lot of information, it's great, but we're sitting here wherever we are in Paris, New York, London, Miami, some big global city in the West. But what we really need is more local interpretation. And it turns out sometimes what they're saying is, we've collected the data already. Can you name a research agency in, say, China or Thailand or Myanmar who could re-look at the data we've collected and just tell us what it really means locally? Is that something that you two have noticed elsewhere, or is it just my experience? Or
I haven't noticed it per se, but I'm primarily do work at this point in Australia, New Zealand, U.S., and then Western Europe. So that might be different in some of the markets you're working in Asia, Dave. I would say that I do think that is getting to what the real value of research companies are. The value is not in the data collection or in these tasks that can be automated. The value is in the insights. And that's where you really have to differentiate yourself.
Right. So, but that leads to another point, which has been interesting. So if I take one example, a big American company contacted me and said, look, we're very active in a number of Asian markets. We use a number of the big market research companies to do a lot of standardized research. But for here's 4 countries. Can you tell me, Dave, a small boutique style agency that we could give all this stuff to and just get them to give us their opinion based on their experience? What was strange to me was I could name a company or 1 or 2 companies in each market. But what was interesting was I then found out that when they approached a couple of these companies, their response was, what, you don't want us to do a survey? So what are we supposed to do? No, we're going to give you all the stuff. We want you to tell us more. What are we missing in reading this about the local market? What's the context? And it brings me back to a point of, I've never, to our earlier point about the fact that the 3 of us are sort of spend our time consulting in different ways now. And I've always been amazed how market research companies are so reticent to actually be consultants as opposed to data collectors and interpreters. It's just always amazes me that they don't want to say, based on our experience, here's our point of view. What they want to say is, well, we can create a new survey for you, or we can do some interviews for you.
Well, I think there's two driving factors behind that. I think the first is that if you've ever worked in a full service research firm, as I think all 3 of us have. Dave, you've worked in a full service research firm, haven't you?
No.
Oh, you haven't. Okay.
No.
Well, most of the, at least in my experience working in full service research firms, a majority of the costs associated with a project are coming out of data collection. The data collection is a real expense, and there's a significant markup on that data collection, usually somewhere between 40 and 60%. So if you take that model out entirely and all they're charging for is the insight piece of it, that's usually the smallest piece cost-wise of the project at this point. So for one thing, it reduces their, the revenue, of course, that's coming from the client. But secondly, I also feel like researchers have struggled to work with data that they don't personally collect and to question it. And that's a real issue as we start seeing more and more passive data collection and measurement entering the research ecosystem. There was even a company I was talking to today who has this amazing, passively collected data set that they are trying to partner with full service research firms on integrating as part of their product offering. And research firms just cannot grasp how to work with that data, which is kind of fascinating to me, because that's supposed to be the one thing that we're really skilled at is interpreting data. It doesn't have to be primary research data, but literally any kind of data set we should be able to look at and make sense out of.
In order to design the primary research, you have to be able, in most cases, unless it's something you've done again and again and again, you've got to be able to go out and you've got to be able to look at economic statistics and other. I'm in the companies that I work for, I think flashing back many years before there was much online, you had like a whole library full of industry publications that we spent thousands of dollars for each year subscribing to, that had all these data. And that was one thing. So yeah, you needed to be able to do that. You needed to be able to design research as well too. And I kind of wonder if skills in both areas aren't slipping. I think it depends on what part of the business you're looking at and how you're interpreting it and all that. But I see a lot of things that concern me. Dave and I have mentioned this before, that very often we find ourselves having to spend more and more time when we're dealing with a client or another agency for the first time, going through the basics. So
sometimes, yeah. So let's move on a little bit. So before we got online, we were doing some swapping of notes and stuff, Kristin. We were talking about impact and the impact that researchers have on clients' business and the way in which we think about impact. And you had some interesting sort of thoughts. So maybe you want to kick off with what we were talking about in your view of the impact that we can have.
Yeah, I think impact is something that's really personal. It just depends on how important having an impact actually is. I mean, I think I'm Gen X. I'm not a millennial or Gen Z, and I think for a lot of my counterparts, having an impact or doing really impactful work is not necessarily as much of a priority as it is for younger generations. I think there's every week I'm reading a new article online about how important it is for millennials and Gen Zs to be doing impactful work, and that's oftentimes more important than other factors that they take into consideration in a job search. So I think that for me personally, I've always wanted to have impactful, meaningful work, and research has been a really great way of ensuring that I'm delivering that on a day-to-day basis with clients. Well, first as obviously a researcher, that's where I started out my career, but certainly now as more of a business analyst, advisor. I certainly want to make sure that what I'm delivering to my clients is actually inspiring real meaningful change in their organizations.
Yeah, I'm interested in the way in which we think about also the impact that we think we have as market researchers versus what is the real impact that we sometimes have on clients. It's the old discussion of a client's really just doing the research to prove something that they really want to do anyway. Justification points, those sorts of things. And I just wonder about the way in which we see all these new techniques and technologies being developed, and you hear a lot of pitches and a lot of proposals and you do that especially much more than I guess I do, in terms of hearing from up and coming companies and what their point of difference is, or what impact they think they can have. I wonder what is a really good example though of a company that has made a difference, a market research company in recent times that really has made a difference in the way in which people approach things or the way they get to results. I'm just sitting
Yeah.
here, wondering that.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what your definition of impact is. I mean, for some people, they want their research to have a societal impact. And for some other people, an impact is, did I impact the overall performance of my company? So it can be two really different things. I mean, you can be really impactful researcher and really only be impacting financial performance, which is great for shareholders or business owners, of course. Impactful research is really important. And then there's also the type of research, a lot of this was highlighted at the summer conference that I was just at this last week, looking at the research, for instance, that's been inspired and supported by the SMR Foundation about supporting nonprofits and research that's being done among some of the biggest NGOs in the world that are really making impactful change in terms of supporting people, particularly in developing and conflict markets. And so for me, when I look at the firms that are, at least the research firms that are really being impactful, it's those firms that are doing that type of really important work. And even firms like ReWe, for instance, I think they're based out of Toronto, they've done some work in the market research space, but they do an incredible amount of work for big global organizations looking at economic and other impact of different social issues that are going on in the world, which I think is a really important contribution.
Well, there are certainly companies that specialize in government work and NGO work, and it's a kind of, from my interaction with them, they're a different breed. They're not the usual marketing types, and they're closer to being social researchers, and many come from that sort of background.
Yeah, well, certainly a lot of the there's companies in a lot of countries where I've been doing a lot more work in West Asia and places like that, Bangladesh, Myanmar, places like that. There are research companies that are market research companies by name, but really are social research companies because primarily their work is built around doing projects for the UN or International Red Cross, organizations like that. I guess what I was thinking about, though, was also the way in which there are companies that impact the way we think about marketplaces, cultures. Last year or so, we talked to the guy that heads Youthology in China, which is a company, a research agency that only specializes in talking to and about the one-child generation, and is tracking them as they age and the difference they make. And some of the work they do really has an impact in terms of helping companies really think about. A simple example, we talk a lot about millennials, and we read far too much about millennials this and millennials that. And what Youthology points out is, yes, there is a cohort that is in line with the concept of millennials in terms of a demography, but actually they're nothing like everything millennials get talked about. Because of the situation of their growing up and stuff like that. So I'm always interested in companies that are making an impact in the way we change the way we think about business, not just social things, but business impacts and business considerations, those sorts of things. But I'm also interested in the way in which we talk about the impact that research organizations have on their parent business, and also whether or not they are responding to the nature of the business. So throw this up in the air. It seems to me like a lot of larger, maybe more established research companies have patterns of behavior, as you pointed out, but Kristin, they probably have models for how they generate revenue, and they seem to be reluctant to change things, and they're not too sure. When I ask them, what are you doing to measure the impact you have actually on your client's business, etc.? Sometimes it's pretty vague, right?
Very vague. Yeah, very vague. Well, and I think even if you talk to corporate researchers that are in brands, oftentimes they don't know what the actual impact was of the research they conducted. And I think part of the challenge there is having researchers who do not have a seat at the table in the C-suite. And so because of that, they're distanced from what the ultimate goal is, which is to drive revenue and drive growth. And there was there was a chart that I saw in Quark's Corporate Market Researchers Report, maybe it was 2 years ago, that was kind of illuminating to me, which was that researchers are not gauging their success by whether or not a company is growing, which is really interesting to me. Because if I was working in a research role, I'd want to know that I was having impact on both the top and the bottom line, and that the research I was doing was actually driving that growth. And I think when I look at really impactful work, I personally want to be able to measure it. I mean, we're researchers by trade, right? So that means we should be able to measure the impact we're having. And I'm personally not a big fan of subjective goals or benchmarks because they're a little too fluffy, and that could be because I'm pretty task driven. I derive great pleasure from crossing things off a list and knowing I've completed something. I mean, so much so that if I do something that's not on the list, I actually add it just so I get the pleasure of crossing it off. And
I love it.
Yeah, that might be a little bit of a sickness.
Hey,
I can't be the only one that does this.
No, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. It's like when somebody asks you for your resume and you sort of start just adding on stuff that, oh, I hadn't really thought about that one. Okay, that'll do.
Right. Right.
But that's good.
Yeah. But I feel that way about goals too. I mean, I want goals to be measurable, and I want to know that I've accomplished what I set out to do. Likewise, I also want to know if I'm not making progress, so I can set a new course. And I think that's really important. And I see this a lot in companies where goals or objectives are rather subjective. So you don't actually know if you've accomplished something. And that to me, and maybe that's because I'm a bit more quantitatively driven, and I want to be able to measure as much as I can to know that what I'm doing is really working.
I think part of the issue is, we can only do so much. Often it's a lot. Sometimes it's very much at the margins. And then what the client does with our recommendations, whether they ignore them, whether they modify them, how they implement them, whatever, how much they invest, is their decision. So I think in our own defense, at least, it can be difficult for us really to know how much impact we're having, because of, so many things being out of our hands. Another issue I think is that
sorry, Kevin, just let me give you a classic example.
Okay.
So last year, an ex-client of mine was visiting Bangkok, where I live. We go out. She contacted me, say, "Hey, I'm going to be in town." So great. So let's have dinner. So we go out to dinner. We went to a very nice restaurant, very nice restaurant I'd never been to before. Very, very expensive. The wine list was very expensive, and I didn't realise that she was going to pay for dinner. So that's very nice. We get towards the end of the thing, and she sort of says, "Look, this is all on me because I feel like we really owe you." And well, why is that? She said, "Well, do you remember about 10 years ago when you did some work for us and you came up with this idea about such and such, and at the time we completely rejected it and said it was a bit silly and it'd never work." Yeah, I do remember that project, actually. She said, "Yeah, well, actually, we've decided that you were probably right, so we're reviving it now." Now, I'm not too sure that they've done any work in the subsequent 10 years to justify going back to that original idea. But I did like the fact that after 10 years, I actually got some credit for an idea. It took them,
Only took 10 years, Dave.
Only took 10 years, but it was a really good bottle of red wine, so I was grateful.
Well, you have certain companies, large and small, but individuals who establish a very close relationship with a small number of clients, and they're confided in. Clients are more likely to spill the beans about certain things, for better or for worse. Unfortunately, you have a lot of people who come in, they're right out of college. They have no business experience. They don't really know that much about research. They learn some stuff on the job, and they're very often nowadays selling some standardized a proprietary method. That's what I used to call it when I developed them. And so they don't really. That's not kind of really their job. And then, they may work for, 2 or 3 years for an agency, maybe go to another, whatever, and they go to a client then after that, or they get out of marketing or marketing research altogether. So I think a lot of the issues, you don't have that sort of wisdom. It's accumulating and being transmitted, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great.
Of course, but and that's why you would hope that people would listen to podcasts like this more often, right? So they can get that accumulated.
Definitely, yeah. Anyway, we're moving along here. I think we're past the 40-minute mark, so I'm going to turn this over to Dave. Did you have anything else you wanted to ask Kristin, or Kristin, do you have anything else you wanted to ask us?
We can't talk to Kristin without briefly mentioning that you've obviously been one of the leaders in the role of women in the industry and sort of promoting that and trying to get more women to speak at conferences and to do all sorts of stuff. And maybe just the 2-minute update of where you think we are as an industry in terms of, in this very volatile time, and of course I don't want to get into the current state of American politics, but it's an extremely volatile time about the whole issue of diversity, et cetera, et cetera. So where do you think we are as an industry now?
Yeah, well, maybe let's not talk about politics. My blood will start to boil immediately.
Don't go there this week. Yeah,
exactly. This will be a lot longer podcast if I get on that train. Well, speaking of measurable goals, Wire had our 10-year anniversary last year, and we did a repeat of a gender and diversity study that we ran in the industry now 6 years ago. And unfortunately, what we found is that we're not moving the needle at a fast enough pace in terms of women, moving into more executive positions and getting board seats and pay parity. So although we have made some progress, at the current rate that we're seeing change, all have long been retired before we see any kind of pay parity in this industry, which is frustrating. But this kind of goes back to impact. We want to, clearly the programming and services are having an impact. There's more awareness, not just around gender diversity, but about diversity issues as a whole, I feel. And that's something that we've really tried to tackle as an organization over the past year with our board. So earlier this year, we broadened our remit, not just to focus on gender diversity, but on diversity in general, whether that's ethnic diversity or sexual preference, gender, able-bodied versus non-able-bodied, just making sure that we get different perspectives and that there's a seat at the table for everyone is really important to us. And I also feel that, for many of the women in this industry, although we're still struggling to gain equal footing with men, many of us are quite fortunate to have served in executive positions. And so it's really up to us to create a path for other people that are maybe not as fortunate or still trying to get to the same places that we are. And so, that's been an important initiative that we've just launched this year. And I also think we're trying to get more men involved in our programming. It doesn't work, as I'm sure you know, to talk about diversity in an all-female bubble. And so getting more men involved in the programming, serving as mentors, sitting on our board has been super, super important for us.
It was interesting. I did attend one event earlier this year, and there was a panel at this. It was a very broad-ranging sort of event, but there was a panel about diversity. But interestingly, the 4 people on the panel were all women. And one guy did stand up and say at the beginning, as the panel started, he said, "Am I allowed?" And I think he genuinely meant it. It was like, "Am I allowed to be here?"
Right.
And it was the sort of the almost that reverse thing. And then, somebody else did point out, well, it's, diversity in terms of ethnically, there was a diverse group, but age-wise, it wasn't particularly diverse. There was all women. It just had to be all women in their 40s. So there was nobody older, nobody younger. So Of course, you got to draw the line too. I mean, how far can you go with diversity? Because otherwise we end up with panels of 67 people, right? So
Right, exactly.
to cover
But
everybody off.
yeah, I do think though, and you'll never see me online celebrating all female panels because I don't celebrate all female panels in the same way I don't celebrate all male panels. I think it's important to bring diverse perspectives, and yeah, like you said, that also means not having everyone of the same age or everyone of the same ethnic background or from the same region of the world. It can be really, really challenging, but I think just being aware of it and doing your best to bring different voices to the table is really what we're trying to achieve, understanding that no one is perfect all the time.
Correct. And, you know, as you're talking, I'm feeling guilty because I'm just thinking back about this podcast, and we have had a number of women and a number of people from different ethnic groups, but we probably might have to try a little bit harder, Kevin, to get the diversity that we should be doing, covering off. And maybe talking to a few more people in some marketplaces about that as well. Kristin, before we go, I always have a question I finish off every podcast with to our guests, which is fairly simple but always tricky. When you think about your not so long career compared to some of us, but yeah, long enough, what's the one question that you never asked that you wish you had?
The one question I never asked.
Yeah. When you think about all the research you've been involved in, et cetera, what's the one question that you never asked but you wish you had now?
Boy, that's a really tough one. One question that I wish. Can it be a question I know the answer to now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think the one question that I wish I had asked earlier in my career was, what are the skills that I need in order to move into an executive position? And what I never asked that question, and what no one ever told me, is that it's not research skills that you need, it is business skills. They are two vastly different things. And, truthfully, I probably haven't conducted research in 15 years. I may have been running businesses. It is a really different skill set. So although it's great that I started my career out in research and that I have primary research experience and I know how to conduct research, when you're running a research firm, you're not doing research anymore. Those executive positions are not doing research day to day. They have to know how to manage a business and manage a P&L and keep the business afloat and growing. And no one ever explained that to me. I sort of learned that, unfortunately, the hard way when I launched my own business, and someone came up to me and was like, oh yeah, I need to get your P&L projection for the next quarter. And they got a blank stare back from me. Fortunately, I launched my first business right during the middle of the dot-com boom. So we didn't need a business plan, and nobody really asked us a whole bunch of questions. They just gave us some money and told us to sit in a corner and create something amazing. That was a great time to start a company, but gosh, my path would have been a lot quicker and a lot easier if someone had just told me that, or if I had just asked that question, which I didn't.
Yeah, good point. Really good point. I know that having been through do the research, be an insights guy, be a planner, develop strategies, got into management. Thank God I'm out of that. Just back doing the insights and the strategy bit again. Because it's a skill set I personally feel much more comfortable with. But you're right. It's a totally different world. So. Yeah.
Some people really love doing the research, and they get into those executive positions and say, it's not for me. I want to go back and do the actual work. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. I personally thrive on the business part of it. That's, I was a good researcher. I wouldn't say I was an amazing analyst. It just wasn't, at the end of the day, it was the business side of the business that I was more interested in. But I do think it's important to have an understanding of the different roles, particularly in a research company, and how you get into those roles.
Right. Good point. Well, Kristin Luck, thank you very much for your time. It's been always a joy to talk to you, and I hope you and I run into each other at conferences around the world soon. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for listening to MR Realities, folks, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye.